When Lena Hart's phone battery drops to 3% and her daughter's formula can scrapes empty, she makes the call that will shatter 8 months of carefully built freedom. To the Mafia kingpin she thought she'd divorced, the father who doesn't know his child exists, and the only man in the world who can save her tonight. But Damian Moretti's help comes with a price she never imagined, the truth that she was never free at all. If you're drawn to stories of second chances, dangerous love, and the thin line between protection and possession, stay with me until the end. And when you're done, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Biatch. The November rain came down like nails against the window, each gust of wind rattling the frame of the tiny studio apartment until Lena Hart was certain the glass would shatter. She sat on the edge of the second-hand futon, her daughter cradled against her chest, and stared at the empty formula can on the counter with the kind of desperation that made her lungs feel too small for her ribs. Maya was 4 months old. 4 months of perfect, helpless life. 4 months of Lena doing everything, to keep her safe, fed, warm, and far away from the world Lena had fled. But tonight, the carefully constructed walls were crumbling. The formula can was empty. The rent was 12 days late. The heat had been flickering on and off for a week, and the landlord's voicemails were getting less polite and more threatening. Lena's phone showed 3% battery and 47 cents in her checking account. Maya's cry started soft, a whimper that built into a wail that tore through Lena's chest like broken glass. She bounced her gently, humming a lull-less tune that came out shaky and wrong. "I know, baby, I know. Mama's going to fix this. I promise." But how? The question sat in her throat like a stone. She'd burned every bridge to get here. Her parents had disowned her when she married Damian. Her friends had vanished when the rumors started. When they saw the black SUVs, the men in suits, the way Damian's name could silence a room. She'd left with nothing but a duffel bag and the clothes on her back, convinced she was doing the right thing. Convinced she was protecting the tiny life growing inside her. 8 months. 8 months of hiding, of working double shifts at a diner until her feet bled, of scraping by in a neighborhood where the streetlights didn't work and the sounds at night made her triple-check the locks. 8 months of telling herself she was free, but freedom, she was learning, had a price. And tonight, she couldn't pay it. Maya's cries grew sharper, more insistent. Lena's hands shook as she checked the kitchen cabinets again, knowing they were empty but hoping for a miracle. A can she'd somehow missed. A sample pack. Anything. Nothing. Her phone buzzed, a low battery warning, 2% now. Lena closed her eyes and felt the weight of the choice pressing down on her like the storm outside. There was only one option left. One number she'd kept buried in her contacts under a fake name, telling herself she'd never use it, never need it. But Maya was screaming now, her little face red and scrunched with hunger, and Lena's pride felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She could see the name. David Martinez. A fake name for a man who was anything but fake. A man whose real name carried weight in shadows in boardrooms, in back alleys and penthouse suites. A man she'd sworn she'd never speak to again. Damian Moretti, her ex-husband, the Mafia kingpin who'd built an empire on fear and precision. The man she'd loved so desperately it had nearly destroyed her. The man she'd fled in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a note that said she couldn't live in his world anymore. The man who had no idea he was a father. Lena's finger pressed the call button before she could think better of it. It rang once, twice. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. On the third ring, the line clicked open, and a voice she hadn't heard in 8 months filled her ear, smooth, controlled, and laced with a danger that made her skin prickle. Lena. Not a question, a statement, like he'd been waiting for this call, like he'd known somehow that she would break. Her voice came out cracked and small. Damian. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. She could hear something in the background. Low voices, the clink of glass. He was somewhere public, somewhere his world continued to spin while hers had stopped. I need... Her voice broke and she hated herself for it. Hated the tears that burned her eyes. Hated that Maya's cries were so loud he could probably hear them through the phone. I need money for baby formula. Just Just enough to get through the week. I'll pay you back. I swear I'll... Where are you? His voice cut through her rambling like a blade, sharp and immediate. Damien, I just need... Where are you, Lena? Each word was precise, controlled, but underneath it she could hear something else, something darker, something that sounded almost like panic wrapped in ice. She hesitated. Giving him her address felt like handing him the keys to a cage she'd fought so hard to escape. But Maya's cries were relentless, and the rain was getting louder, and the apartment was so cold she could see her breath. Monroe Street, Building 43, Apartment 2B. Another silence. Then, I'm sending a car. You have 1 hour to pack what you need, and be ready. Wait, Damien, I don't need a car. I just need... 1 hour, Lena. Don't make me come get you myself. The line went dead. Lena stared at the phone until the screen went black, until the 2% battery gave out and left her in the dim glow of the single lamp that still worked. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. What had she done? She looked down at Maya, whose cries had softened to exhausted hiccups, her tiny fists pressed against Lena's chest. I'm sorry, Lena whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's damp forehead. I'm so sorry, baby girl. But sorry didn't change what was coming. Sorry didn't stop the black SUV that pulled up exactly 53 minutes later, its headlights cutting through the rain like searchlights. Sorry didn't stop the 2 men in dark suits who knocked on her door with the kind of politeness that made her skin crawl. Men whose eyes were flat and professional, men who called her Mrs. Moretti, even though she'd spent 8 months trying to forget that name. We're here to take you to Mr. Moretti, ma'am, the taller one said, his voice neutral. Do you need help with your bags? Lena looked at the duffel bag she'd packed in a daze. Diapers, clothes for Maya, a few essentials for herself. Everything she owned fit in one bag. Again. No, she said quietly. I've got it. The drive was silent except for Maya's occasional whimpers and the sound of rain against the windows. Lena watched the city change through the tinted glass, watched the broken streetlights give way to manicured trees, the graffiti-covered walls give way to wrought iron gates. She knew this route, had driven it 100 times when she'd been his wife, back when the world had felt both terrifying and intoxicating, back when she'd been too young and too in love to see the bars on the gilded cage. The estate loomed ahead like something out of a dark fairy tale. Sprawling grounds, high walls, security cameras glinting in the floodlights. The gates opened automatically, and the SUV pulled up the circular drive to the front entrance where Lena had once walked in a white dress, breathless and naive and convinced that love could conquer anything. The door opened before she could even unbuckle Maya's carrier. A woman in a crisp uniform appeared with an umbrella, shielding them from the rain. This way, Mrs. Moretti. That name. She wanted to correct it, to say she wasn't his wife anymore, but the words died in her throat because what if that wasn't true? What if the divorce papers she'd signed had never been filed? What if... No, she couldn't think like that. Not yet. Inside, the house was exactly as she remembered. Marble floors that echoed with every step. High ceilings painted with frescoes she'd once found beautiful and now found suffocating. The scent of expensive wood polish and fresh flowers that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Everything was pristine. Perfect. Cold. Mr. Moretti is in his study, the woman said, leading her down a hallway lined with paintings whose worth could have fed a small country. He's expecting you. Lena's feet moved on autopilot, muscle memory carrying her to the heavy oak door she'd stood outside 1,000 times before. The woman knocked twice, then opened it without waiting for an answer. Damien stood with his back to the door, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the rain-soaked grounds, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was wearing a black suit, perfectly tailored, his dark hair slightly longer than she remembered. He didn't turn around when she entered. Leave us, he said quietly. The door clicked shut behind Lena, and suddenly the room felt too small, the air too thick. She stood frozen, holding Maya's carrier with white-knuckled hands, waiting for him to turn around, to say something, to acknowledge that she was here and everything had changed. When he finally did turn, the breath left her lungs in a rush. 8 months hadn't softened him. If anything, he looked harder. Sharper cheekbones, darker shadows under his eyes, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of sleepless nights and iron control. His eyes found hers first, gray as winter storms, and something flickered there that she couldn't name. Then his gaze dropped to the carrier in her hands. The world seemed to stop. Lena watched him take in the sight of the pink blanket, the tiny sleeping face visible through the mesh side. Watched his expression shift from controlled neutrality to something raw and unguarded. Shock, maybe, or disbelief, or something deeper that made her chest ache. How old? His voice was barely above a whisper. 4 months. The math was simple, devastating. She could see him do the calculation, could see the moment the truth settled over him like a weight. His hand tightened around the whiskey glass until she thought it might shatter. Why didn't you tell me? It wasn't an accusation. It was worse. It was pain, wrapped in a question he already knew the answer to. Because I couldn't. Lena's voice shook, but she forced herself to hold his gaze. Because I looked at the life you live. The guns hidden in every room, the men who follow you like shadows, the blood that you pretend I can't see on your hands, and I knew I couldn't raise a child in that world. I couldn't let her grow up thinking that fear and violence are normal, that love means control and surveillance, and what? Damien's voice cut through her words like a whip, sharp and sudden. He set the glass down with deliberate care, but his eyes were blazing. You thought raising her in a slum was better? You thought working yourself to exhaustion and starving yourself so she could eat was protecting her? Lena's cheeks burned. You've been watching me. Of course I've been watching you. He said it like it was obvious, like it was his right. Did you think I would just let you disappear? Did you think I wouldn't make sure you were safe, even if you hated me for it? Safe? The word came out like a laugh, bitter and sharp. You call that safe? You let me struggle. You let me live in a place where the heat barely works, and the neighbors deal drugs in the hallway. You watched me fall apart, and you did nothing. I gave you what you said you wanted. His voice dropped to something dangerous, something that made her take a step back even though he hadn't moved. Freedom, space, a chance to prove you could make it on your own. But I made sure the landlord didn't evict you when you fell behind. I made sure the men who tried to break into your building found reasons to leave that neighborhood. I made sure the diner you worked at stayed in business, even when it should have gone under months ago. So don't tell me I did nothing, Lena. I've been keeping you alive from a distance because you made it very clear you didn't want me close. The words hit her like a freight train. She stared at him, pieces clicking together, the landlord's sudden patience, the way the break-in attempts had stopped after the first week, the diner that somehow always had just enough customers to keep the doors open. You had no right, she whispered. I had every right. You're my... He stopped, the word catching in his throat. His eyes flicked to the carrier again, to the tiny life sleeping peacefully despite the storm raging around her. Show me. It wasn't a request. Lena's hands shook as she bent to unbuckle the carrier straps. Maya stirred slightly, making a small sound of protest, and Lena's heart clenched. She didn't want this. Didn't want to hand her daughter to a man who wielded power like a weapon, who built empires on fear, who... But when she lifted Maya out of the carrier, when she turned and saw Damien's face, every thought in her head went silent. He looked terrified. This man, who'd stared down rival families without flinching, who'd negotiated million-dollar deals with the calmness of someone ordering coffee, who'd built a reputation on being untouchable and unmovable, looked absolutely terrified of the tiny infant in Lena's arms. Her name is Maya, Lena said softly. She watched Damien's throat work as he swallowed hard. He took a step closer, then another, moving with the kind of careful precision he usually reserved for disarming bombs or navigating political landmines. When he reached them, he didn't immediately take Maya. Instead, he just looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to memorize every detail. She has your eyes, he said finally, his voice rough, and your stubborn chin. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face, gone so quickly Lena almost missed it. Then he looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression nearly broke her. Can I? Yes. She transferred Maya into his arms before he could finish the question, before she could second-guess herself, before the rational part of her brain could scream that this was a mistake. She watched him adjust his hold, watched his large hands cradle Maya's tiny body with surprising gentleness, watched something in his entire being shift as he held his daughter for the first time. Maya's eyes fluttered open, those blue-gray eyes that were so much like his, and she stared up at Damien with the serious, considering expression that always made Lena smile. For a long moment, father and daughter just looked at each other, and Lena felt something crack open in her chest, something she'd been holding closed for 8 months. "Hello, Maya," Damien whispered, and his voice was so gentle, so unlike anything Lena had heard from him in years, that tears burned her eyes. "I'm your father, and I'm sorry it took me so long to meet you." Maya made a small cooing sound, her tiny hand reaching up to grab at his tie. Damien let her, his expression softening into something Lena had almost forgotten he was capable of, tenderness, unguarded and real. But then something changed. She saw it happen in real time, the softness hardening back into control, the vulnerability sliding behind walls of steel and strategy. When he looked at Lena again, his eyes were calculating. "You're staying here," he said. Not a question, a decision. "Damien, both of you, tonight. I'm calling Dr. Reynolds to check her over, make sure she's healthy. I'm having a nursery set up in the East Wing. Tomorrow we'll discuss—" "No." The word came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't back down. "No, Damien, this isn't how this works. I called you for help, not to be taken prisoner." "Prisoner?" His eyebrows rose and something dangerous flickered in his expression. "Is that what you think this is? Lena, you called me from a slum apartment with an empty formula can and no heat. You're exhausted, you're malnourished, and you're trying to raise my daughter in conditions that would make a decent prison look comfortable. So forgive me if I'm not asking permission to keep you somewhere safe and warm and fed. You don't get to make that choice for me. Someone has to, because you're clearly incapable of making good ones for yourself." The words hung in the air like a slap. Lena felt her face flush with anger and humiliation, felt every defense she'd built over the past 8 months threatening to crumble. "Give her back," she said quietly. "Lena, give her back. Now." For a moment she thought he might refuse, thought he might use the fact that he was holding Maya as leverage, as power, but instead he carefully transferred their daughter back into Lena's arms, his hands lingering a moment longer than necessary. "I'm not your enemy," he said softly. "I know you think I am. I know you see me as someone who wants to control you, to cage you. But Lena, I've spent 8 months respecting your choice to leave, even though it killed me. I've kept my distance. I've let you try to build a life without me. But you're here now because that life isn't working, and I cannot stand by and watch you and my daughter suffer out of some misguided need to prove you don't need me." "It's not about proving anything," Lena shot back. "It's about the fact that needing you comes with a price I'm not willing to pay. It comes with security details and locked doors, and a life where every decision is filtered through what's safest, what's most controlled, what keeps you in power. I left because I wanted Maya to grow up free, Damien. Free to make choices, to take risks, to live without always looking over her shoulder. And how's that working out?" The question was soft, but it cut deep. Lena had no answer. Because the truth was, she was standing in his study, soaked from rain, wearing clothes that hadn't been properly washed in weeks, holding a hungry baby she couldn't feed. The truth was, freedom had turned out to be just another kind of prison, one with different bars but the same desperation. "One night," Damien said, his voice gentler now. "Stay one night. Let me take care of you both. Let Dr. Reynolds make sure Maya is healthy. Get some real sleep in a real bed. Eat a proper meal. And tomorrow we'll talk about what happens next. I promise I won't force anything. But please, Lena, let me at least do this much." She wanted to say no, wanted to grab Maya and walk out of this house and never look back. But her legs were shaking with exhaustion, her stomach was cramping with hunger, and Maya deserved better than the pride that had brought them to this point. "One night," she whispered, "but tomorrow we leave." "Tomorrow we talk," Damien countered, "and then you decide." It was the best compromise she was going to get. Lena nodded once, sharp and final, and watched something like relief cross Damien's face. He pressed a button on his desk, and within seconds the door opened and a woman in her 50s appeared, Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, who'd always been kind to Lena even when the rest of the staff had treated her like a temporary fixture. Mrs. Chen, please take Mrs. Moretti to the blue suite. Make sure she has everything she needs, clothes, toiletries, anything for the baby. And call Dr. Reynolds. I want him here within the hour. Of course, Mr. Moretti. Mrs. Chen's eyes softened when she saw Lena and Maya. It's good to see you home, dear. Home. The word felt wrong and right at the same time. Lena followed Mrs. Chen out of the study, acutely aware of Damien's gaze on her back until the door closed between them. As she walked through the familiar hallways, she tried not to notice how much easier it was to breathe here, how the warmth seeped into her bones after months of being cold, how the silence felt safe instead of threatening. The blue suite was exactly as she remembered. A spacious bedroom with an attached bathroom, plush carpets, windows that overlooked the garden. Mrs. Chen had already arranged for a bassinet to be brought in, along with what looked like an entire baby store's worth of supplies. I'll have dinner sent up in 30 minutes, Mrs. Chen said gently. And Dr. Reynolds should be here soon. Is there anything else you need? Lena looked at Maya, who was starting to fuss again, and then at the unopened packages of formula on the dresser. No, she said quietly. Thank you. When Mrs. Chen left, Lena sank onto the edge of the bed and let the tears she'd been holding back finally fall. She fed Maya with shaking hands, watched her daughter drink with the desperate urgency of real hunger, and felt the guilt settle over her like a weight. She'd been so determined to do this alone, so convinced that she could protect Maya from Damien's world by simply removing them from it. But sitting here, in this warm room, watching her daughter finally eat her fill, she had to face the brutal truth. She'd failed. And worse, Damien had been right. The thought made her sick, made her want to scream or throw something or run again. But she was so tired, so completely exhausted that even the anger felt too heavy to hold. Dr. Reynolds arrived 40 minutes later, a silver-haired man with kind eyes who'd been Damien's personal physician for decades. He examined Maya with gentle efficiency, asking questions about her birth, her feeding schedule, any concerns Lena had. When he was done, he gave Lena a look that was equal parts professional and paternal. She's underweight, he said carefully. Nothing critical, but she should be gaining more. And you, Mrs. Moretti, are severely malnourished and showing signs of chronic stress and sleep deprivation. I'm going to recommend— I know, Lena cut him off quietly. I know. He softened. You're not a bad mother for asking for help. In fact, recognizing when you need it is one of the hardest parts of being a good parent. The words were kind, but they still stung. After he left, Lena ate the dinner that was brought up. Real food, hot and perfectly prepared, more than she'd eaten in a single meal in months. She bathed Maya in the large tub, using the expensive baby products that someone had thoughtfully stocked, and dressed her in soft pajamas that still had tags on them. By the time she laid Maya in the bassinet, her daughter was already asleep, her little face peaceful and relaxed in a way Lena hadn't seen in weeks. Lena stood over her, watching her breathe, and felt the weight of every choice she'd made pressing down on her shoulders. She didn't hear Damien enter, didn't realize he was there until she turned and found him standing in the doorway, still in his suit, but with his tie loosened and his expression unreadable. She's asleep, Lena said unnecessarily. I can see that. He stepped into the room, moving quietly, and came to stand beside her at the bassinet. For a long moment, they both just looked at Maya, this tiny person they'd created, this life that connected them, whether Lena wanted it to or not. I meant what I said, Damien said finally. About tomorrow. You can leave if you want. I won't stop you. Lena looked at him, searching his face for the lie, for the control she was sure was lurking beneath the surface. You promise? I promise. He met her eyes, and for once there was no calculation there, no strategy, just exhaustion that mirrored her own. But I'm asking you to stay, not forever, not even for long, just long enough to let me help, long enough for us to figure out what's best for her. And what if what's best for her is being away from you? Pain flickered across his face, quick and sharp. Then I'll accept that. But let me prove that it's not. Let me show you that I can give her a life that's safe and free, that she doesn't have to choose between security and happiness. You can't give her both. Not in your world. Then maybe it's time I change my world. The words hung between them, impossible and tempting. Lena wanted to believe him, wanted to think that Damian Moretti, the man who'd built an empire on fear and control, could somehow transform into someone who valued freedom over power. But she'd learned the hard way that wanting something didn't make it true. 1 week, she heard herself say. I'll stay for 1 week. And if at any point I feel like you're trying to control me, if I feel like this is becoming a cage again, I'm gone. And this time, no watching from a distance, no secret protection. You let me go, and you stay gone. She watched him weigh the terms, watched the muscle in his jaw tick as he considered. Finally, he nodded. 1 week on one condition. What? You let me bring in a therapist, someone neutral, someone who can help us communicate without it turning into a war, someone who can help us figure out how to be parents to Maya, even if we can't be married to each other. Lena blinked, surprised. You want to go to therapy? I want to do whatever it takes to keep my daughter in my life. If that means therapy, then yes. He looked at Maya again, and something in his expression softened. I've already lost 8 months with her, Lena. I don't want to lose any more because we're both too stubborn to ask for help. It was the last thing she'd expected. Damian Moretti, admitting he needed help, suggesting therapy like it was a reasonable solution instead of a weakness. She studied him, looking for the angle, the manipulation, but all she saw was a man who looked as lost as she felt. Okay, she said quietly. 1 week. With a therapist. With a therapist. They stood there in the dim light of the nursery, two people who'd once loved each other desperately and now could barely occupy the same room without everything catching fire. But between them, in the bassinet, Maya slept on, oblivious to the war being waged over her future, oblivious to the fact that her very existence had brought two broken people back together in the most unlikely of ways. Damian left first, pausing at the door to look back at them one more time. Get some sleep, Lena. You look like you haven't had a full night's rest in months. I haven't. Then tonight you will. The security system is active, the doors are locked, and no one will disturb you. You're safe here. Safe. That word again. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to point out that safety meant different things to different people. But she was too tired, and the bed looked too comfortable, and for once, just for tonight, she wanted to stop fighting. Good night, Damian. Good night, Lena. When he was gone, she changed into the silk pajamas someone had left on the bed, probably Mrs. Chen, and slipped under covers that felt like clouds after months of a thin futon mattress. She told herself she would stay awake, would keep watch, would be ready to grab Maya and run if Damian went back on his word. But within minutes, exhaustion pulled her under like a tide, and for the first time in 8 months, Lena Hart slept deeply and dreamlessly in the house she'd once called home. Lena woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of Maya cooing softly in the bassinet beside her. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot the 8 months of struggle, forgot the phone call, forgot everything except the warmth of clean sheets and the feeling of having actually slept. Then reality crashed back in, and she sat up so quickly her head spun. The clock on the nightstand read 9:47. 9:47. She hadn't slept past 6 in months. Panic seized her chest as she scrambled out of bed and rushed to the bassinet, her heart pounding until she saw Maya looking up at her with those serious blue-gray eyes, perfectly content and dry and safe. Oh, baby girl, Lena breathed, lifting her daughter into her arms. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to sleep so long. Maya gurgled happily, completely unbothered by her mother's panic, and Lena felt the guilt twist deeper. Her daughter should always look this content, this well-rested. Instead, for months she'd been waking to Lena's exhausted fumbling in a cold apartment, to stress and fear and constant worry. A soft knock on the door made her tense. Mrs. Moretti, I have breakfast for you? Mrs. Chen's voice was gentle, non-threatening, but Lena still felt her shoulders lock up at the formality of it all. Just a minute. She threw on a robe that had been laid out, silk, expensive, probably worth more than everything she'd owned in that studio apartment, and opened the door to find Mrs. Chen with a tray laden with more food than Lena could eat in a day. Fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, coffee that smelled like heaven. Mr. Moretti asked me to let you sleep, Mrs. Chen said, setting the tray on the small table by the window. He said you needed rest more than you needed an early breakfast, and this came for the baby. She gestured to a corner of the room that Lena hadn't noticed before, where at least a dozen shopping bags sat with logos from high-end baby stores, clothes, toys, blankets, more supplies than Maya could use in a year. He went shopping? Lena heard herself ask, incredulous. He had it delivered at 7 this morning, been on the phone with stores since 6. Mrs. Chen's expression softened with something that looked almost like approval. In 20 years of working for Mr. Moretti, I've never seen him like this. He scheduled interviews with 3 different nanny services this afternoon, had the entire East Wing baby-proofed overnight, and called in favors from every pediatrician in the city to get recommendations for, what did he call it? The absolute best in infant care. Lena sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, still holding Maya, trying to process this information. He's interviewing nannies? Well, yes, he wants options. Wants you to be able to choose who helps with the baby, if you want help at all. Mrs. Chen paused, then added carefully, He's trying, Mrs. Moretti. I know you have your reasons for leaving. I won't pretend to understand all of it, but he's trying. After Mrs. Chen left, Lena fed Maya and then ate breakfast herself, forcing down more food than her stomach was used to while her mind raced. This version of Damien, the one who baby-proofed wings of the house overnight and interviewed nannies and apparently cared about her having choices, didn't fit with the man she'd run from. That man had made decisions without consulting her, had surrounded her with guards she didn't ask for, had loved her with a kind of possessive intensity that had felt like drowning. But maybe, a small voice in her head whispered, you never gave him the chance to be different. Maybe you ran before finding out if he could change. She shook the thought away. She couldn't afford to be naive. Not again. Not when Maya's future was at stake. By the time she'd showered and dressed in clothes from the bags, everything in her size, everything tasteful and comfortable, it was nearly 11. She found Damien in his study, exactly where she'd expected him to be, surrounded by paperwork and speaking in rapid Italian to someone on the phone. He looked up when she entered, his expression shifting from business to something softer in the span of a heartbeat. He ended the call abruptly. You slept well? Too well. You should have woken me. Why? Maya was fine. Mrs. Chen checked on her twice. You needed sleep. He stood, moving around the desk with that predatory grace that had always made her pulse quicken. I have the therapist coming at 2. Dr. Catherine Mercer. She's one of the best family therapists in the state, specializes in high-conflict situations and co-parenting. She's discreet, professional, and according to 3 different references, she doesn't take anyone's side. Lena adjusted Maya on her hip, using her daughter as a buffer between herself and Damien's intensity. You worked fast. I don't like wasting time. He looked at Maya, and again that softness crept into his expression. How is she this morning? Good. She's been fed, changed, happy. Lena hesitated, then asked, Mrs. Chen said you had the East Wing baby-proofed? The entire wing. New locks on the windows, guards on all the outlets, safety gates on the stairs, non-toxic paint in what will be her nursery. Though that's your decision, where she sleeps. I just wanted the option to be safe if you choose it. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. I also had background checks run on 15 different nanny services. The top 3 will be here this afternoon for you to interview. But again, only if you want help. I'm not assuming you need it. I'm just providing options. Options? Lena repeated the word like it was foreign. Since when do you deal in options instead of decisions? Since I realized that making decisions for you is what drove you away in the first place. His voice was quiet, controlled, but she could hear the thread of something raw underneath. I spent 8 months thinking about what I did wrong, Lena. 8 months replaying every fight, every time you flinched when I told you what to do instead of asking what you wanted. I can't change who I am overnight, but I can try to change how I love you. The words hit her like a physical blow. Damien, let me finish. He took a step closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. I know you don't trust me. I know you think this is temporary, that eventually I'll revert to type and you'll have to run again. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'll fail at this. But for Maya's sake, for our daughter's sake, I want to try. I want to prove that I can be the kind of father she deserves, the kind of partner you needed me to be. I didn't come back to be your partner, Lena said, but her voice came out weaker than she intended. I came back because I was desperate. I know. And I'm asking you to stay because there's a difference between being desperate and being smart enough to accept help when you need it. He looked at Maya again, and something in his face cracked open. She looks so much like you when she concentrates, that little furrow between her eyebrows. That's all you. You do the same thing when you're reading contracts. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, then faded. The therapist. 2:00. Will you be there? It wasn't really a question, but the fact that he phrased it as one felt significant. Yes, I'll be there. Good. He started to say something else, then stopped, his attention catching on something behind her. Lena turned to see a man in a dark suit hovering in the doorway. One of Damien's men, his face professionally blank. Sir, the man's eyes flicked to Lena and Maya, and he hesitated. Not now, Marcus. Damien's voice went cold in a way that made Lena's skin prickle. I said I wasn't to be disturbed unless it was critical. It is critical, sir. It's about the Calabrese situation. Damien's jaw tightened. 5 minutes. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Marcus disappeared, and Lena felt the familiar weight of Damien's world settling back over the room. The Calabrese family. She remembered that name from before, remembered the late-night phone calls and the tense meetings, and the way Damien's shoulders would lock up when he talked about them. You have to go, she said flatly. I have to make a call. It won't take long. It's always won't take long until it does. Until it's 3 a.m. and you're still in this study with blood on your shirt cuffs and telling me everything's fine when we both know it's not. Damien's eyes flashed. That's not fair, isn't it? You want to prove you can change, Damien, but you can't even go one morning without your business pulling you away. How is that different from before? Because before, I would have just left without explaining. Now I'm telling you I have to handle something, and I'm asking you to trust that I'll be back in time for the appointment. He moved closer, and his voice dropped to something almost pleading. I'm not asking you to like my business. I'm asking you to give me the space to handle what I have to handle while I'm working on making it better. Rome wasn't built in a day, Lena. No, but it burned in one. The words hung between them, sharp and cutting. Damien's expression hardened back into the mask she knew so well, the one that turned him into the kingpin instead of the man. I'll be done by 1:30, and I'll be at that appointment at 2. You have my word. He left before she could respond, and Lena was alone in the study with Maya and the familiar feeling of being secondary to whatever crisis was unfolding in Damien's empire. She wanted to scream, wanted to grab her daughter and walk out and prove that she didn't need his promises or his therapy or his carefully constructed options. But she'd made a deal. 1 week. 1 week to see if this could work. She spent the next few hours exploring the estate with Maya, rediscovering rooms she'd once known and finding them both familiar and strange. The library still had the first edition books she'd loved to read. The garden still had the bench where she used to sit in the mornings with coffee. The kitchen still smelled like Mrs. Chen's cooking, warm and safe, and nothing like the world that existed beyond these walls. But there were changes, too. New security cameras in places she didn't remember, different guards at different posts. A subtle shift in the way the staff looked at her, less like she was a temporary fixture and more like she was someone who'd left and come back, someone whose status was uncertain. At 1:30, she made her way back to the study and found Damien already there, changed into a fresh shirt, no blood on the cuffs. He looked up when she entered, and something like relief crossed his face. You came. I said I would. I know, but I wasn't sure you'd believe I'd be here. Lena settled into one of the chairs across from his desk, adjusting Maya in her arms. Did you handle your crisis? For now. He didn't elaborate and she didn't push. That was new too, the not pushing. Before she would have demanded details, demanded to know if anyone was hurt, if he was in danger. Now she just felt tired. Dr. Catherine Mercer arrived at exactly 2:00, announced by Mrs. Chen and entering the study with the kind of confidence that came from years of navigating difficult conversations. She was in her early 50s, Lena guessed, with sharp eyes and an air of professional warmth that somehow didn't feel fake. Mr. Moretti? Mrs. Moretti. She shook both their hands, then smiled at Maya. And this must be the young lady at the center of all this. Maya, Lena said softly. Beautiful name. Dr. Mercer settled into a chair, pulling out a leather notebook. Before we begin, I want to establish some ground rules. Everything said in these sessions is confidential unless it involves immediate danger to yourselves or Maya. I'm not here to take sides or to judge. I'm here to help you communicate effectively and find solutions that work for your family, whatever form that family takes. Does that sound acceptable to both of you? Lena and Damien both nodded. Good. Then let's start with the basics. Lena, can you tell me why you left 8 months ago? The question was direct, unflinching, and Lena felt herself tense. She glanced at Damien, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I left because I was pregnant and terrified, Lena said finally. Terrified of raising a child in a world where violence is always lurking. Terrified of my daughter growing up thinking that armed guards and security protocols and constant surveillance are normal. Terrified that she'd learn to love someone who uses fear as a tool. And did you tell Damien you were pregnant before you left? No. Why not? Lena's hands tightened around Maya. Because I knew he'd never let me go if he knew. Because I knew he'd use the baby as a reason to keep me locked down, protected, controlled. And I couldn't live like that anymore. Dr. Mercer made a note, then turned to Damien. And when you found out Lena was gone, what did you do? I had my people find her within 24 hours, Damien said flatly. I made sure she was safe. I ensured her landlord wouldn't evict her, that the neighborhood was monitored, that her workplace stayed solvent. I watched from a distance because she'd made it clear she didn't want me close. But you never reached out directly? No. Why not? Damien's jaw worked. Because she left me a note that said she couldn't live in my world anymore. Because she made a choice, and I was trying to respect it even though every instinct I had was screaming to drag her back and make her understand that I could keep her safe. Make her understand, Dr. Mercer repeated. Not ask her to understand. Make her. The distinction landed like a bomb. Damien's eyes flashed, but he didn't argue. Yes, make her. Because in my world, understanding comes second to survival, and I've spent my entire adult life making sure the people I care about survive. At the cost of their autonomy? At the cost of whatever it takes. The honesty was brutal, and Lena felt something twist in her chest. This was the Damien she'd run from, the one who believed love and control were the same thing, who couldn't separate protection from possession. Lena, Dr. Mercer said gently, what made you call Damien last night? I ran out of options. I ran out of money and formula and pride. Lena's voice cracked. I ran out of everything except the certainty that my daughter deserved better than what I could give her alone. And now that you're here? Now I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. Grateful? Angry? Trapped? She looked at Damien, and the words came spilling out before she could stop them. I wanted so badly to prove I could do this without you. I wanted Maya to grow up free, to never know what it feels like to have every move monitored, every choice filtered through someone else's idea of what's safe. But I failed. And the worst part is that you were right, and I hate that. I don't want to be right, Damien said quietly. I want you to be safe, both of you. But those aren't the same thing. Lena's voice rose, and Maya startled against her chest. She forced herself to lower her volume, to breathe. Safe in your world means locked doors and armed guards, and never being able to just exist without wondering who's watching. I didn't want that for her. And I didn't want my daughter growing up cold and hungry because her mother's pride was more important than accepting help. The words were harsh, but Dr. Mercer didn't intervene. She just watched them, her pen moving across her notebook, letting the tension build and break like a wave. You both want what's best for Maya, she said finally, but you have very different ideas of what that looks like. Damien, you see safety as the foundation. Without it, nothing else matters. Lena, you see freedom as essential. Without it, safety becomes a prison. Does that sound accurate? They both nodded, reluctant and tired. Then here's what I propose. For the next week, we work on finding the intersection between those two needs. We identify what safety looks like that doesn't require total control. We identify what freedom looks like that doesn't require total isolation. And we build a framework that allows Maya to have both. That's not possible, Lena said. Why not? Because Damien's business doesn't allow for halfway measures. You're either all in or you're a liability. There's no middle ground. Dr. Mercer turned to Damien. Is that true? He was silent for a long moment, and Lena could see the war happening behind his eyes, the part of him that wanted to argue, to insist that his world was the only safe option, battling against the part that had called a therapist in the first place. My business has rules, he said finally, but I make those rules. And if the rules need to change to accommodate my family, then they change. Even if it puts you at risk, Lena challenged. Even then. I don't believe you. The words were out before she could stop them, harsh and final. Damien's face went carefully blank, and Lena felt a surge of guilt immediately followed by anger. She wasn't being unfair, she was being realistic. She'd lived through too many broken promises to believe this one. Then what would it take for you to believe me? Damien asked, and his voice was so quiet, so stripped of its usual command that it made her throat tight. I don't know, Lena whispered. I honestly don't know if there's anything you could do that would make me trust this. Dr. Mercer leaned forward. Lena, I'm going to ask you something that might be difficult. If Damien did everything you asked, if he eliminated every element of his business that you found threatening, if he gave you complete freedom to come and go, if he removed every guard and every security measure, would you stay? The question hung in the air like a trap. Lena opened her mouth to say yes, to say of course she would, but the word wouldn't come. Because the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that part of her had loved the intensity of Damien's world, had felt alive in the danger and the passion and the sheer force of his devotion. Part of her had loved being the center of his universe, even when it felt suffocating. I don't know, she said again, and hated herself for the honesty. That's okay, Dr. Mercer said gently. Not knowing is a valid answer. It means we have work to do, but it also means you're being honest with yourself about what you actually want versus what you think you should want. She turned to Damien. And you. If Lena decided she wanted to leave, to take Maya and build a life separate from yours, could you let her go? Damien's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. No. Even if it was what she wanted, I would fight for her. For them. I would do everything in my power to convince her to stay, to show her that we could make this work. But if she was truly determined to leave, if nothing I did or said could change her mind, he stopped, his throat working. I don't know if I could. And that's the truth. The honesty was devastating. Lena looked at him, really looked, and saw the same fear she'd been carrying for months reflected back at her. Fear of losing control. Fear of being alone. Fear that love wasn't enough to bridge the impossible distance between who they were and who they needed to be. This is good, Dr. Mercer said, and both of them stared at her like she was insane. This is honest. You're both acknowledging your limitations, your fears, your actual feelings, instead of the ones you think you should have. That's where real progress starts. She closed her notebook and stood. Here's your homework for tomorrow's session. Damien, I want you to identify 3 specific ways you can give Lena more autonomy within this house without compromising what you consider essential security. Lena, I want you to identify 3 specific things Damien could do that would help you feel less trapped. And both of you, I want you to spend at least 1 hour together with Maya where you're not discussing the past or the future, just being present as parents. After she left, the silence in the study felt heavy and awkward. Lena stood, ready to retreat to the safety of the blue suite, but Damien's voice stopped her. The hour with Maya. Can we do it now? She turned, surprised. Now? Unless you have somewhere else to be. There was no sarcasm in his voice, just a simple question. Lena looked down at their daughter, who was starting to fuss again, ready for her afternoon nap. She needs to sleep soon. Then I'll sit with you while she falls asleep, if that's okay. It was such a small request, such a normal thing for a father to ask, that Lena felt something crack in her chest. Okay, but in the nursery, not here. They walked together to the east wing, to the room that had been transformed overnight into a perfect nursery. Soft colors, expensive furniture, every safety feature imaginable. Lena settled into the rocking chair with Maya while Damien pulled up a second chair, sitting close enough to watch but not so close that it felt invasive. "Tell me about her," he said quietly as Lena began to rock. "Tell me everything I missed." So she did. She told him about the pregnancy, about finding out alone in a clinic bathroom and crying with a mixture of terror and wonder. She told him about feeling Maya kick for the first time, about the midnight cravings and the swollen ankles and the fear that got worse as her due date approached. She told him about the labor, 23 hours of it, alone except for a nurse who held her hand because she had no one else. "I named her Maya because it means water in Hebrew," Lena said softly, watching their daughter's eyes flutter closed. "Because I wanted her to be like water, adaptable, strong, able to flow around obstacles instead of being broken by them." Damien was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I should have been there. I didn't give you the chance. You shouldn't have had to. I should have been someone you could count on, someone you trusted enough to tell. Instead, I was someone you had to hide from." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked utterly defeated. "I failed you, Lena. Long before you left. I failed you." "We failed each other," she said quietly. "I never told you I felt trapped. I just let the resentment build until I couldn't breathe anymore. That's on me too." They sat there as Maya's breathing evened out into sleep, as the afternoon light shifted through the windows, and something between them felt different. Not healed, there was too much damage for that, but maybe slightly less broken. When Lena finally stood to lay Maya in the crib, Damien stood too, moving to the opposite side. Together, they lowered their daughter onto the soft mattress, their hands almost touching over her sleeping form. "Tomorrow," Damien said, "I'll have my list ready. 3 ways to give you more autonomy. And I'll have mine. 3 things you can do to help me feel less trapped. It's a start. It's all we have." Damien looked like he wanted to say more, wanted to close the distance between them and make promises they both knew he might not be able to keep. But instead, he just nodded once and left the nursery, leaving Lena alone with the daughter they'd made and the impossible task of figuring out how to build a future from the wreckage of their past. That night, Lena lay awake long after Maya had settled into her bassinet, staring at the ceiling and replaying the therapy session in her mind. Dr. Mercer's question haunted her. Would she stay even if Damien gave her everything she asked for? The fact that she couldn't answer felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, with no idea if there was ground below or just endless falling. She must have eventually slept because she woke to pale morning light and the sound of voices downstairs, low, tense, speaking rapid Italian. Lena's body went rigid with recognition, that tone, that cadence, business. The kind that usually ended with Damien disappearing for days and coming back with shadows in his eyes and blood he claimed wasn't his. She checked Maya, found her still sleeping peacefully, and pulled on the robe before slipping out into the hallway. The voices grew clearer as she descended the main staircase. Damien and at least 2 other men, their words clipped and urgent. She caught fragments. Shipment, delay, Calabrese, problem. The study door was partially open. Through the gap, she could see Damien at his desk, his face hard as granite, and 2 men she didn't recognize standing across from him. One was gesturing emphatically, his voice rising. "Can't just walk away from this. You made commitments. The Calabrese family expects—" "I don't care what they expect," Damien cut him off, his voice like ice. "I told you to handle it. That's why I pay you." "Some things require your personal attention, boss. This is one of them. If you're not at the meeting tomorrow, they'll see it as disrespect. And disrespect in this business gets people killed. I know." Damien's laugh was bitter. "I wrote that particular rule, Vincent. But here's a new rule. My family comes first. You want me at a meeting? Schedule it around my daughter's needs. You want my personal attention? Make sure it's worth taking me away from the 2 people who actually matter. Otherwise, delegate it or let it burn." The silence that followed was thick with shock. Lena's hand gripped the banister hard enough to hurt. "Boss, are you serious right now?" the second man asked carefully. "You're talking about restructuring decades of protocol because I have a 4-month-old daughter and a wife who's giving me 1 week to prove I can be someone worth staying for, Damien said flatly. So yes, Vincent, I'm serious, dead serious. Now get out and handle the Calabrese situation the way I trained you to. If you can't, then I'll find someone who can. The men left quickly, their faces carefully blank, but their body language screaming confusion. Lena pressed herself against the wall as they passed, not wanting to be seen, not wanting to interrupt whatever seismic shift was happening in Damien's world. When their footsteps faded, she stepped into the doorway. Damien looked up and something crossed his face, surprise, then resignation, then something that might have been hope. How much did you hear? Enough? Lena moved into the room, keeping distance between them. You just told your men that your family comes first. You've never said that before. Not in all the time I knew you. I never had this much to lose before. He stood, shoving his hands in his pockets like he didn't trust what they might do otherwise. That's one of my 3 things, by the way. For the homework, I'm restructuring my business protocols so that nothing short of a direct threat to our lives requires my immediate personal attention. Everything else gets delegated to my captains. I stay home unless it's critical. Lena stared at him, trying to process this. You can't just, Damien, your entire empire is built on you being personally involved in everything, on people knowing that you're the one making the decisions, enforcing the rules. If you step back, then my captains step up. And if they can't handle it, then I've been a poor leader for not training them properly. He moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. I spent 8 months thinking about what I valued more, power or you, control or family, and the answer should have been obvious, but it took losing you to actually see it. Words are easy, Damien. Following through is different. I know. That's why I'm showing you, not just telling you. He pulled a folder from his desk and held it out to her. This is my second thing. A complete financial accounting of every account I control, every asset I own, every stream of income, legitimate and otherwise. Full transparency. If you want to know where the money comes from, how much blood is on it, what I'm actually involved in, it's all there. No more secrets. Lena took the folder with shaking hands, the weight of it surprising. Why? Because you left thinking I was keeping you in the dark to control you. And maybe at first I was, but somewhere along the way, the secrecy became habit, became easier than explaining, became a wall between us that I didn't know how to take down. So I'm taking it down. All of it. She opened the folder and immediately felt dizzy. Numbers, account names, business dealings laid out in meticulous detail. Some of it was legitimate. Real estate, investments, holdings that wouldn't raise eyebrows. But there was other income too. Streams marked with codes she didn't understand but could guess at. Protection money, gambling, things that existed in the shadows of the law. This could destroy you, she said quietly. If this information got out, then I'd be destroyed. But you asked for transparency, and I'm giving it to you. What you do with it is your choice. His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw was locked tight. He was terrified. Terrified she'd use this against him. Terrified she'd leave anyway. Terrified that honesty would be what finally broke them instead of secrets. Lena closed the folder carefully and set it on the desk. What's the third thing? The third thing requires you to come with me. He offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was warm, familiar, and for a second she was 22 again, holding this same hand and thinking she could save him from his demons. He led her through the house to a part of the estate she'd rarely visited, the security wing where the cameras were monitored, where the guards coordinated, where the machinery of Damien's protective paranoia lived and breathed. Her steps slowed as they approached, but he kept walking, kept holding her hand until they stood in front of a wall of monitors showing every angle of the property. Michael, Damien said to the head of security, who stood up immediately. Show Mrs. Moretti the new protocols. Michael looked uncomfortable but pulled up a tablet and handed it to Lena. She looked down at a series of settings, toggles, access controls that meant nothing to her until she started reading the labels. Camera access, guard rotations, security zones, and next to each one, a simple switch that was currently set to owner override. You're giving me control of the security system? She asked, incredulous. Partial control, Damien corrected. You can turn off any interior cameras you want anytime you want. You can restrict which guards have access to which parts of the house. You can set zones where no one except family is allowed without your explicit permission. The perimeter security stays active. That's not negotiable, not with the enemies I've made. But inside these walls, you decide who watches and who doesn't. Lena's thumb hovered over the controls, her heart pounding. This was power, real power, the kind Damien had never given anyone, not in all the years she'd known him. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you said you felt like a prisoner, like every move was monitored, every moment was surveillance, so I'm giving you the keys to your own cage. You want privacy? You have it. You want guards to stay out of certain areas? You control that. I'm keeping you safe, but you're deciding what that safety looks like inside our home." She looked up at him, searching his face for the angle, for the manipulation, for the way this would turn against her later. But all she saw was exhaustion and desperate sincerity. "I could turn everything off," she said. "I could shut down every camera, send every guard to the perimeter, leave us completely exposed inside." "You could. And if you did, I'd have to trust that you had a good reason. That's what this is, Lena. Trust. Real, terrifying, absolute trust that you won't use this power to hurt us, and that I won't take it back the first time you make a choice I don't agree with." Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the tablet. Michael took it gently, his expression carefully neutral, and Lena felt the weight of what Damien had just done settle over her like a mantle. This wasn't a small gesture. This was him handing over control of the thing he valued most: security, safety, the ability to know and monitor and protect. This was him choosing to be vulnerable. They walked back to the main house in silence, Lena's mind racing too fast for words. When they reached the foyer, she finally found her voice. "I need to think about this. All of it. The business restructuring, the financial transparency, the security access. I need time to process what you're offering and what it actually means. Take all the time you need. We have 6 more days." "And what if 6 days isn't enough?" Damien's expression flickered with something that might have been pain. "Then we'll figure out what comes next. But Lena, I need you to know something. I'm not doing this to manipulate you into staying. I'm doing this because these are changes I should have made years ago, whether you came back or not. I'm doing this because Maya deserves a father who knows the difference between protection and control. And I'm doing this because if you do leave again, I want it to be for the right reasons, not because I failed to show you I could change." Before she could respond, Mrs. Chen appeared with Maya, who'd apparently woken up asking for her mother. Lena took her daughter gratefully, burying her face in Maya's soft hair and using the moment to collect herself. "Dr. Mercer is coming at noon," Mrs. Chen said gently, "and the nanny candidates are scheduled for this afternoon, if you still want to meet them." "I do," Lena said, surprising herself. "I want to at least see the options." Damien's expression shifted to something that might have been relief, but he didn't comment. Just nodded once and disappeared back into his study, giving her space she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. The therapy session that afternoon was different from the first. Dr. Mercer had them sit closer this time, close enough that Lena could see the fine lines around Damien's eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair that she hadn't noticed before. "Let's start with the homework," Dr. Mercer said. "Damien, you go first." He laid out the 3 changes he'd made, his voice steady and professional, like he was reporting on a business deal rather than the complete restructuring of his life. When he finished, Dr. Mercer turned to Lena. "And how do you feel about these changes?" "Terrified," Lena admitted, "because they're exactly what I asked for, and now I don't know what to do with them. It's one thing to demand transparency and autonomy when you don't think you'll get it. It's another to actually have it, and realize as you have no idea how to use it without destroying everything." "Can you elaborate on that fear?" Lena shifted Maya in her arms, using her daughter as an anchor. "If I turn off the cameras and something happens, if someone gets in, if Maya gets hurt because I wanted privacy, that's on me. If I look at his financial records and see things I can't unknow, things that make me complicit just by knowing, that's on me too. And if he actually follows through on pulling back from his business and it all falls apart, if people die because he wasn't there to make the call, how do I live with being the reason for that?" "Those are significant fears," Dr. Mercer acknowledged. "Damien, how do you respond to that?" By saying that none of those outcomes are Lena's responsibility, he said immediately. If I can't build a security system that keeps us safe even when she wants privacy, that's a failure of my planning, not her choices. If my business falls apart because I'm not micromanaging every detail, then it was never as strong as I thought and needed to fail anyway. And if seeing the truth about my finances makes her complicit, then I'm the one who put her in that position by building a life on blood money in the first place. But you're putting the burden of choice on me, Lena argued, turning to face him fully. You're making me the one who decides how much security is enough, how much truth I can handle, whether your business lives or dies. That's not freedom, Damien. That's just a different kind of cage. Then what do you want? The question came out sharper than he probably intended, frustration bleeding through his control. I'm giving you autonomy and you're calling it a cage. I'm giving you transparency and you're calling it a burden. What do you actually want from me, Lena? Because I'm running out of things to offer you. The room went silent. Even Maya seemed to sense the tension, going still and quiet in Lena's arms. Dr. Mercer watched them both with sharp, assessing eyes. I want to not be the only thing standing between you and your old life, Lena said finally, her voice breaking. I want you to make these changes because you want them, not because you're trying to keep me. Because the second I'm not enough, the second the cost of changing becomes too high, you'll go back to who you were, and I'll be left holding the shattered pieces again. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. You can't promise that. You're right. I can't. Damien leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and when he looked at her, his eyes were raw with something that looked like desperation. I can't promise I won't fail. I can't promise that some crisis won't pull me back into old patterns, that I won't make mistakes, that there won't be moments where I choose wrong. But I can promise that I will keep trying, that every single day I will wake up and choose to be better than I was yesterday, that I will fight like hell to be the man you need me to be, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. That's all I've got, Lena. My word that I won't stop fighting for us. Lena felt tears burning her eyes, felt the weight of his words settling in her chest like stones. She wanted to believe him, wanted it so badly it physically hurt. Show me your list, Dr. Mercer said gently to Lena. The 3 things you needed from Damien. Let's see if what he's offered matches what you actually asked for. Lena pulled out the paper she'd worked on late last night, the words she'd written and rewritten until they felt true. 1. I need space to make decisions about my life and Maya's life without feeling like I'm being watched or judged or controlled. 2. I need to know the truth about your business, about the dangers, about what we're actually dealing with, not sanitized versions or comforting lies. 3. I need to see evidence that you're changing for yourself, not just for me. That even if I left tomorrow, you'd continue on this path because it's the right thing to do. She looked up at Damien. You've given me the first 2. But the third, that's the one I can't verify. That's the one I have to take on faith, and faith is something I'm running really short on right now. Then let me earn it back, Damien said quietly. Day by day, choice by choice, let me show you through actions instead of words. Dr. Mercer made notes, then looked between them. Here's what I'm seeing. You both want the same thing, a life where love doesn't require sacrifice of self, where safety doesn't require imprisonment, where family comes first without destroying everything else. But you're both terrified that want isn't enough, that the gap between who you are and who you need to be is too wide to bridge. She paused, letting that sink in. So here's my suggestion. For the next 4 days, we focus on building trust through small actions, not grand gestures or sweeping changes, but daily choices that prove you can both follow through on what you're promising. Damien, that means actually delegating when business comes up, actually stepping back even when every instinct says to take control. Lena, that means actually using the autonomy you've been given, making choices about security, about Maya's care, about your own life, even when it's scary. And both of you, that means communicating when you're struggling instead of retreating into old patterns. And if we can't, Lena asked, then we have an honest conversation about what comes next. But let's not write the ending before we've actually written the middle. After Dr. Mercer left, Lena spent the afternoon interviewing nanny candidates while Damien worked in his study. Or tried to work. She could hear his phone ringing constantly, could hear the frustration in his voice when he directed calls to his captains instead of handling them himself. The third candidate, a woman named Sarah with 15 years of experience and warm, steady eyes, made Maya laugh in a way that sent a pang through Lena's chest. She was perfect. Too perfect. The kind of person who could give Maya everything Lena had been failing to provide. "She's wonderful," Sarah said, smiling down at Maya. "And you're doing a great job, Mrs. Moretti. I can tell she's well-loved." "Thank you," Lena managed, though the words felt hollow. Well-loved wasn't the same as well-cared for. Love hadn't kept Maya warm when the heat went out. Love hadn't filled her stomach when the formula ran out. After Sarah left with promises to send over references, Lena found Damien in the garden, staring at his phone with an expression that looked like he was physically restraining himself from answering it. "Problem?" she asked. He looked up, startled. "Vincent. Third time he's called in an hour. Wants me to mediate a dispute with one of our suppliers. Says it's urgent." "Is it?" "Probably. But it's also something he can handle if I force him to." Damien pocketed the phone, visibly setting it aside. "How were the interviews?" "Good. Sarah's probably the best fit. She's got experience, credentials, great references. Maya liked her." "But?" Lena sat on the bench beside him, surprised he could read her hesitation so easily. "But hiring her feels like admitting I can't do this alone, like I'm failing as a mother." "You're not failing. You're accepting help. There's a difference." "Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, accepting help looks a lot like giving up." Damien turned to face her fully, and his expression was softer than she'd seen it in days. "When I got shot 3 years ago, you remember that?" She nodded. How could she forget? 2 bullets in his chest, surgery that lasted 9 hours, weeks of recovery where he'd been more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. "I tried to do the physical therapy alone," he continued. "Tried to push through the pain without help because asking for it felt weak. And you know what happened? I nearly ruined the healing, nearly caused permanent damage because I was too proud to admit I needed support." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. "Hiring Sarah isn't giving up. It's being smart enough to know when you need reinforcements. It's putting Maya's needs ahead of your ego. That's not failure, Lena. That's being a good mother." The words broke something open in her chest. And before she could stop herself, she was crying, great gasping sobs that had been building for months. Damien pulled her against his chest without asking, one hand cradling her head while the other rubbed slow circles on her back. And for a moment she let herself forget all the reasons she couldn't trust this, couldn't trust him, couldn't believe that any of this would last. "I'm so tired," she whispered against his shirt. "I'm so tired of being scared and angry and never knowing if I'm making the right choices." I know you are." His voice was rough, thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I let it get this bad before I realized what I was doing to you. I'm sorry I made you feel like you had to choose between me and your freedom. I'm sorry for all of it." They sat there as the sun dropped lower in the sky, as the garden filled with long shadows and the sound of evening birds. When Lena finally pulled back, Damien's shirt was damp with her tears, and his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I want to hire Sarah," she said quietly. "Not full-time, maybe part-time. Just enough that I can breathe, can sleep, can be a better mother when I'm with Maya." "Then hire her. Whatever you need. And I want to look at the financials, really look at them. Not tonight, but soon. I need to understand what I'm choosing if I stay. Okay? And I need you to tell me the truth about something." Damien tensed slightly, but nodded. "Anything." "The divorce papers, the ones I signed before I left. Did you file them?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine. She watched Damien's face carefully, watched the war that played out in his expression, the desire to lie warring with his newfound commitment to honesty. "No," he said finally, and the word was like a bomb detonating. "I never filed them. You're still legally my wife." Lena's breath left her lungs in a rush. She'd suspected, had known somewhere deep down that something wasn't right about how easily the divorce had supposedly gone through. But hearing it confirmed, hearing him admit it out loud, made her feel like the ground was disappearing beneath her feet. "How long have you known I didn't know?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Since the day you left. You handed me the papers, and I told you I'd file them, and then I didn't. I kept them in my desk drawer and told myself I was waiting for the right time, waiting for you to cool down, waiting for—" He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I was waiting for you to come back. You lied to me. Yes. You let me think I was free when I never was. Yes. You've been controlling me this entire time, even from a distance, making sure I stayed your wife, stayed legally bound to you, stayed—" Her voice broke on a laugh that had no humor in it. "I left you because I thought you'd never let me go, and I was right." She stood up so fast she felt dizzy, backing away from him like he was dangerous. And maybe he was. Maybe he'd always been dangerous, and she'd just been too young or too in love or too desperate to see it clearly. "Lena, please. Don't." She held up a hand, stopping him from coming closer. "Don't apologize. Don't explain. Don't try to make this okay, because it's not okay. You lied to me about the most fundamental thing. You lied about my freedom. And I can't—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't think past the betrayal burning in her chest, the fury and hurt and horrible twisted understanding that part of her had wanted this, had wanted to still be his wife, had wanted the security of that legal bond, even as she railed against everything it represented. "I'm going to my room," she managed finally, "and I need you to not follow me. I need space to think about what this means, what I want to do with this information. Can you give me that?" "Of course. Whatever you need." She almost made it to the house before his voice stopped her one more time. "Lena, for what it's worth, I was going to tell you. Today, after the session, Dr. Mercer said transparency, and this was the biggest lie I've been carrying. I'm sorry you found out by asking instead of by me volunteering it, but I am telling you now. If you want the divorce, if you want out, I'll file the papers tomorrow. I'll give you everything you're entitled to, and I won't fight it. That's not manipulation or strategy. That's just the truth." Lena looked back at him, this man she'd loved and left and somehow ended up back with, and felt the full weight of the impossible choice settling over her shoulders. "I don't know what I want," she whispered. "That's the problem. I don't know if I want to be married to you or free of you. I don't know if staying is brave or stupid. I don't know anything anymore except that I'm tired and scared, and so far past my limit I can't even see it in the rearview mirror." "Then figure it out," Damien said gently. "Take tonight, take tomorrow, take however long you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk. And if you decide you're not ready, if you decide you want me to leave you alone, I'll do that too. Just don't run again. Not without telling me first. Not without giving me a chance to let you go the right way." She nodded once, not trusting her voice, and fled into the house before the tears could start again. That night, Lena didn't sleep. She paced the blue suite with Maya in her arms, walking circles around furniture that cost more than most people made in a year, trying to make sense of the knot of emotions tangled in her chest. Anger, yes. Betrayal, absolutely. But underneath those easier feelings lurked something more complicated: relief. The shameful, undeniable relief that she was still his wife, still legally bound to a man who terrified and drew her in equal measure. She hated herself for that relief almost as much as she hated him for the lie. By dawn, Maya was finally sleeping and Lena's feet ached from pacing. She stood at the window watching the sun paint the gardens gold and tried to remember who she'd been before Damien Moretti walked into her life. 22 and waiting tables at an upscale restaurant, dreaming of art school and a studio apartment in the city. He'd come in with business associates, all expensive suits and dangerous charm, and she'd spilled wine on his jacket because her hands shook when he looked at her. He'd laughed, tipped her $300. Come back the next night and asked her to dinner. She'd thought it was a fairy tale. Prince Charming with dark eyes and darker secrets, sweeping her into a world of luxury and passion and intensity she'd never imagined. The wedding had been small, private, perfect. The honeymoon in Tuscany had felt like a dream. And then reality had set in. The guards, the guns, the late nights, and coded phone calls and slowly suffocating realization that she'd married a king who ruled through fear. A soft knock pulled her from the memories. She opened the door to find Mrs. Chen with a breakfast tray and a carefully neutral expression. "Mr. Moretti asked me to bring this up. He's been in his study all night." Mrs. Chen set the tray down, then hesitated. He also asked me to tell you that Dr. Mercer called. She's available for an emergency session this afternoon if you want it. No pressure, just an option. Lena looked at the food, fresh fruit, yogurt, coffee that smelled like heaven, and felt her throat tighten. Even now, even after she'd learned about his lie, Damien was thinking about what she needed. Tell him yes, she heard herself say. Tell him I'll meet with Dr. Mercer at 2. The hours before the appointment dragged like years. Lena fed Maya, bathed her, dressed her in one of the impossibly soft outfits from the shopping bags, and tried not to think about the fact that she still wore her wedding ring. She'd never taken it off, even when she left. Had told herself it was because she didn't want to deal with the questions, the explanations, the hassle of removing it. But looking at it now, the simple platinum band with 3 small diamonds, she had to face a harder truth. She'd kept it on because some part of her had never really left, had never really wanted to be free. At 1:30, Sarah arrived for her first official shift. Lena had called her that morning, offering her 3 afternoons a week to start, and Sarah had accepted with such warmth and professionalism that Lena felt some of the crushing weight lift from her shoulders. You take all the time you need, Sarah said, settling into the rocking chair with Maya like she'd been doing it for years. We'll be just fine here. Won't we, sweet girl? Maya cooed in response, and Lena felt the tears threaten again. How many times could one person cry before they simply ran out of water? She found Damien already in the study when she arrived, looking like he hadn't slept either. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie discarded, and there were shadows under his eyes that made him look older than his 35 years. Thank you for coming, he said quietly, like she was a guest instead of his wife. His legal, actual wife, whether she'd known it or not. I almost didn't. I know. They sat in silence until Dr. Mercer arrived, her sharp eyes taking in the tension immediately. She settled into her chair with the calm of someone who'd mediated far worse situations and looked between them. Who wants to start? He lied about the divorce, Lena said flatly. He never filed the papers. I've been legally married to him this entire time, and he let me think I was free. Dr. Mercer's expression didn't change, but Lena saw her make a note. Damien, is this true? Yes. Why? Damien's hands clenched on the arms of his chair. Because filing those papers felt like giving up, like accepting that I'd failed so completely, she'd rather have nothing than be tied to me. And I couldn't. I wasn't ready to accept that. So you lied. So I lied, he agreed. And there was no defensiveness in his voice, just exhausted honesty. I told myself I was giving her time to cool down, that she'd change her mind and come back and we could work it out. I told myself a lot of things that were easier than admitting I was controlling her future without her consent. Lena, how did you find out? I asked him directly last night, and to his credit, he told me the truth instead of lying again. Lena's voice was bitter. But that doesn't change the fact that he let me believe I was divorced for 8 months, that he watched me struggle and suffer and never once thought to mention, oh, by the way, you're still my wife. I thought about it every day, Damien said quietly. Every single day, I thought about calling you and telling you, but I was terrified that once you knew, once you realized you were still bound to me legally, you'd run farther and faster and I'd never get you back. So instead you manipulated the situation to keep me trapped. Yes. The admission was stark, unflinching. I kept you trapped because I was too much of a coward to let you go. Dr. Mercer let the words settle before speaking. Lena, what would you have done differently if you'd known you were still married? The question caught her off guard. She opened her mouth to say she would have filed the papers herself, would have hired a lawyer, would have fought to be free. But the words wouldn't come because they weren't true. I don't know, she admitted finally. I don't know if I would have fought it or accepted it or been relieved, and that's what makes me so angry. Not just that he lied, but that part of me wanted the lie. Part of me wanted to still be his wife even while I was pretending to myself that I'd moved on. That's a very honest admission, Dr. Mercer said gently. And it brings us to the core question you've both been dancing around since our first session. Lena, do you want to be married to Damien? I don't know. That's not good enough anymore. Not after everything that's happened, everything that's been revealed. You need to decide, not today, not this minute, but soon. Because you can't build a future on maybe. You can't co-parent on uncertainty. You can't heal from this kind of betrayal without knowing what you're actually fighting for. Lena felt the words like a slap. You're saying I have to choose. Stay married or get divorced. No more middle ground. I'm saying that middle ground is where you've been living for 8 months, and it hasn't worked for either of you. You can't move forward without making an actual choice. And what if I make the wrong choice? Then you make it, and you deal with the consequences. But making no choice is still a choice, and right now it's the one that's hurting you both the most. Damien had been silent through this exchange, but now he leaned forward. Can I say something? Dr. Mercer nodded. Lena, I know I've lost the right to ask you for anything. I know that lying about the divorce, controlling your life from a distance, all of it, I know it's unforgivable. But I'm asking anyway. I'm asking you to take the next 3 days and really think about what you want. Not what you think you should want, not what's safest or most logical, what you actually want. He stood, pulling something from his pocket, a folded document that Lena recognized immediately. The divorce papers. These are the originals, the ones you signed 8 months ago. He set them on the table between them. If you want the divorce, I'll sign them right now. I'll file them tomorrow. I'll give you everything, full custody of Maya, financial support, the house if you want it, anything and everything you could possibly need. And I'll stay out of your life except for coordinated visits with our daughter. Lena stared at the papers like they were a snake about to strike. Or, Damien continued, his voice rough, you can tear them up. You can choose to stay married to give us, a real chance. Not because you're trapped or desperate or out of options, but because you actually want to build a life together. A different life than before, one with boundaries and honesty and all the things we should have had from the beginning. You're giving me an ultimatum, Lena said. I'm giving you a choice, a real one, this time. Because Dr. Mercer is right. We can't keep living in this limbo. It's destroying both of us. Dr. Mercer cleared her throat. I'm going to leave you two alone for a bit. I'll be back in 30 minutes, and we can continue then. But I think you need some time to process this without me watching. After she left, the silence in the study felt thick enough to cut. Lena looked at the divorce papers, at Damien's signature line still blank, and felt the weight of the decision crushing her chest. I can't decide this in 30 minutes, she whispered. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to take the papers. Think about them. Talk to a lawyer if you want. I'll pay for it, and I'll make sure there's someone who works for you, not me. Take your 3 days. And then tell me what you've decided. And if I choose divorce, then I'll sign and I'll let you go. Really let you go this time, not the half measure I did before. His voice cracked slightly. It'll kill me, but I'll do it. Because I love you enough to want you to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include me. Lena's hands shook as she picked up the papers. They felt heavier than they should, weighted with the future they represented. Freedom, autonomy, the chance to build a life on her own terms without always looking over her shoulder, without armed guards and coded language, and the constant low hum of danger, but also loneliness, single parenthood. Maya growing up with a part-time father instead of 2 parents who loved her enough to fight through their damage. I hate that you're making me choose, she said. I know, but someone has to, and it can't be me. Not this time. This has to be your decision, Lena. Yours alone. She folded the papers and stood, needing distance, needing air. I'm going to the garden. Don't follow me. I won't. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm on her skin and the garden was in full bloom. Flowers she didn't remember being planted, creating cascades of color against the manicured green. She found the bench where they'd sat the day before, where Damien had held her while she cried, and sank onto it with the papers clutched in her hands. A different version of herself would have torn them up immediately. The 22-year-old who'd fallen in love with danger and passion would have run back inside and chosen him without hesitation. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She was a mother. She was someone who'd survived 8 months of poverty and struggle and learned exactly how strong she could be when she had to be. The question was whether that strength was enough to survive being married to Damien Moretti. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Dr. Mercer approaching, her expression gentle. May I sit? Lena nodded, and they sat in silence for a moment before Dr. Mercer spoke. I'm going to tell you something that might not be what you want to hear. In my professional opinion, you and Damien have one of the most intense trauma bonds I've ever witnessed. You're drawn to each other in ways that aren't entirely healthy, but also aren't entirely unhealthy. And the work you'd have to do to make this marriage functional would be enormous. Years of therapy, constant communication, fundamental changes to how you both operate in the world. So you think I should leave him? I think you should make the choice that gives you the best chance at happiness and gives Maya the best chance at a healthy childhood. And only you can determine what that looks like. Dr. Mercer paused. But I also think you should know that Damien's changes so far aren't performative. In the 3 sessions we've had, I've seen genuine effort to restructure his thinking, his business, his entire approach to relationships. That doesn't mean he won't fail, doesn't mean there won't be setbacks, but it does mean he's serious about this. How can you tell? Because people don't give up power the way he has unless they're genuinely committed to change. The security access, the financial transparency, the business delegation, those aren't small gestures. Those are foundational shifts that would take years to rebuild if you left. He's burning bridges to his old life, Lena. The question is whether you trust him enough to meet him halfway across the fire. Lena looked at the papers in her hands. And if I don't? If I choose safety over risk? Then you'll always wonder what might have been. But you'll also have peace, autonomy, freedom to build the life you want without compromise. There's no wrong answer here. There's just the answer that's right for you. That evening, Lena asked Mrs. Chen to bring dinner to her room. She couldn't face Damien yet, couldn't sit across from him knowing the decision she had to make. Sarah had left for the day, and Maya was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, completely unaware that her mother was quietly falling apart. Lena ate without tasting the food, showered without feeling the water, and finally sat on the bed with the divorce papers spread out in front of her. She'd read them 3 times now, studying every clause, every provision. Damien had been more than generous in what he'd offered. Full custody, substantial child support, the house in her name if she wanted it, access to accounts that would ensure she never struggled again. He was making it easy for her to leave, making it so she'd never have to worry about money or security or any of the things that had driven her back to him in the first place. Which meant staying would be a choice made purely on whether she wanted him, whether she believed in the possibility of them. A knock on the door startled her. She quickly gathered the papers before calling out, "Come in." Damien entered carrying a wooden box she recognized, her art supplies, the ones she'd left behind when she fled. He set it carefully on the dresser and took a step back. "I thought you might want these. Mrs. Chen said you used to paint in the evenings." Lena stared at the box, emotion rising in her throat. She hadn't painted in 8 months. Hadn't had the time, the energy, the space. Hadn't even thought about the loss until seeing the supplies made it suddenly, achingly real. "You kept them," she managed. "Of course I kept them. I kept everything. Your books, your clothes, your ridiculous collection of vintage teacups. I kept it all in case—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "In case you came back." "That's not healthy, Damien." "I know. My therapist told me the same thing." "Your therapist?" "I've been seeing someone. Started 3 months after you left when I realized drinking myself unconscious every night wasn't a sustainable coping strategy." He leaned against the doorframe, keeping distance between them, like he didn't trust himself to get closer. "She's helped me understand some things. About control, about fear, about why I built my entire identity around being untouchable and what that's cost me." "And what has it cost you?" "Everything that actually matters. You. 8 months with my daughter. The chance to be someone worth loving instead of someone people fear." His voice dropped. "The ability to look at myself in the mirror without seeing a monster." The raw honesty of it took her breath away. This wasn't the Damien she'd left, the one who wore power like armor and never let anyone see him bleed. This was someone new, someone vulnerable and uncertain and trying so damn hard to be better. "I don't know how to trust this," Lena whispered. "I don't know how to trust you." "I know, and I don't blame you." He pushed off from the doorframe, and for a moment she thought he might come closer, might try to touch her, but he just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking lost. "But I need you to know something. Whether you stay or go, whether you sign those papers or burn them, I'm not going back to who I was. I'm not doing this to win you back, Lena. I'm doing this because my daughter deserves better than a father who rules through fear, because I deserve better than a life built on violence and control. Because you were right about everything, and it took losing you to finally see it. You can't promise that. You can't promise you won't revert when things get hard. You're right. I can't. But I can promise I'll keep trying. That I'll keep going to therapy, keep delegating my business, keep choosing family over empire even when it costs me. I can promise that the man I'm becoming is someone I actually want to be, regardless of whether you're here to see it. He moved toward the door, then paused. The papers are yours to do with as you please. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. Just take care of yourself, okay? And Maya. That's all I ask. After he left, Lena opened the wooden box with shaking hands. Inside were her brushes, her paints, her sketchbooks filled with half-finished drawings from another lifetime. She pulled out her favorite brush and felt the familiar weight of it, felt something in her chest loosen and expand. She'd forgotten this part of herself. In the chaos of survival, of keeping Maya alive and fed and safe, she'd let go of everything that made her more than just a mother. The art, the creativity, the quiet joy of making something beautiful out of nothing. The next morning, she woke early and set up an easel in the corner of the blue suite. Maya was sleeping, the house was quiet, and for the first time in 8 months, Lena painted. She painted without thinking, without planning, just letting the colors and shapes flow through her like water. And slowly, something emerged on the canvas, abstract and chaotic. Dark blues and grays shot through with unexpected gold, like storm clouds with sun breaking through. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear the door open until Damien's voice made her jump. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Mrs. Chen said you weren't at breakfast, and I wanted to make sure." He stopped, staring at the canvas. "Lena, that's incredible." She looked at what she'd created, really looked at it, and felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's a mess. It's honest." He moved closer, his eyes never leaving the painting. "I forgot how talented you are, how much you gave up when you married me." "I didn't give it up. You never asked me to stop painting." "No, but I created a life where you didn't have time or space or energy for it, where everything revolved around my schedule, my needs, my world." He finally looked at her, and something in his expression made her chest ache. "I stole this from you, and I'm sorry." "Damien, no, let me finish. I've been thinking about what you said, about Maya growing up free, about wanting her to make her own choices and take her own risks. And I realized you're not just talking about her, you're talking about yourself. About the freedom I took from you when I made you into Mrs. Moretti instead of letting you be Lena, who happened to be married to me." He moved to the window, his back to her, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. "If you stay, I need you to keep painting. I need you to go back to school if you want, to have your own career, your own identity separate from me. I need you to be whole, not just a reflection of what I need you to be. Because Maya should grow up seeing her mother as someone complete, someone who chose this life because she wanted it, not because she had no other options." Lena set down her brush, her hands trembling. "You're saying this now, but what about 6 months from now? A year? What happens when your business has a crisis and you need me to be available, need me to put my life on hold, need me to be the perfect Mafia wife? Then I handle the crisis myself, or I restructure the business so those crises don't happen, or I accept that some things matter more than power and money and control." He turned to face her. "I've already started the process. I'm divesting from the illegal operations slowly, carefully, so I don't start a war. But in 5 years, maybe less, the Moretti name will be attached to legitimate businesses only. Real estate, investments, things that don't require blood to maintain. That's impossible. You can't just walk away from that world." "I can't walk away overnight, but I can transition. I can build something better, something cleaner, something Maya can be proud of instead of ashamed of. And if the other families don't let you, then I'll deal with that when it comes. But I'm not asking you to wait until everything's perfect to make your decision. I'm asking you to decide based on who I'm trying to become, not who I was." Lena felt tears burning her eyes. "You're asking me to have faith in you." "Yes, and I know I haven't earned that. I know I've done everything possible to destroy any faith you might have had, but I'm asking anyway because I don't know what else to do." They stood there in the morning light, paint-stained and exhausted, and so far past their defenses that everything felt raw and exposed. Lena thought about the divorce papers hidden in her nightstand, thought about the life she could build alone. Safe, controlled, free from the constant fear that came with loving someone dangerous. But she also thought about the painting on the easel, about the wooden box of supplies Damien had kept for 8 months just in case. Thought about the way he looked at Maya like she was something precious and fragile and worth protecting. Thought about the man standing in front of her who was trying so hard to be better that it was written in every line of his face. "I need one more day," she said finally. "One more day to think, to process, to figure out what I actually want instead of what I'm afraid of. Take it. Take 2 if you need them. I'm not going anywhere." After he left, Lena cleaned her brushes and stared at the painting for a long time. It was a mess, chaotic and unplanned. But it was also beautiful in its honesty, in its refusal to be anything other than exactly what it was. Maybe that was what love looked like. Not perfect, not safe, not controlled, just honest and messy and real. That afternoon, Lena did something she hadn't done in 8 months. She asked Damien to watch Maya while she went for a walk, alone, without guards shadowing her steps or security checking in every 15 minutes. She half expected him to refuse, to insist on protection, to revert to the controlling patterns that had driven her away. But he just nodded and took Maya into his arms with the careful reverence he always showed when holding their daughter. "Take all the time you need," he said quietly. "We'll be fine here." She walked the estate grounds, following paths she remembered from another lifetime. The gardens had changed, new plantings, different arrangements, but the bones of the place remained the same. Past the rose garden where they'd had their wedding photos taken. Past the fountain where he'd proposed on one knee with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Past the bench where she'd told him she was pregnant the first time before fear had made her flee. That memory stopped her cold. The first time. There had been a first time before Maya. 3 years into their marriage, she'd gotten pregnant and been terrified to tell him because by then she'd already started to feel the cage closing in. She'd sat on that bench for an hour, trying to find the words, trying to imagine bringing a child into his world. And then she'd lost the baby at 12 weeks, a miscarriage that had felt like both devastation and terrible relief. Damien had been gentle with her grief, had held her while she cried, had said all the right things, but he'd also tightened security, increased surveillance, wrapped her in even more layers of protection until she could barely breathe. She'd never told him about the relief, had never admitted that part of her had been glad not to trap a child in the life that was slowly suffocating her. And then 5 years later, Maya had happened. Unplanned, unexpected, and this time Lena had run before she could lose herself completely in Damien's need to keep her safe. But what if she'd been wrong? What if his controlling nature wasn't about ownership but about the terror of losing someone he loved? What if the tightening security after the miscarriage had been his broken way of trying to protect what remained? The thought made her sink onto that same bench, her head in her hands. Nothing about their relationship had ever been simple. Every gesture of love had been tangled with control. Every moment of tenderness had been shadowed by danger. And yet here she was, 8 months after fleeing, seriously considering going back. She pulled out her phone and stared at the number she'd saved months ago. A lawyer who specialized in family law, recommended by a woman at the diner who'd escaped her own bad marriage. Lena had told herself she was keeping it just in case, just as insurance. But she'd never called, never taken that final step toward making the divorce real. Her finger hovered over the call button. One phone call, and she could start the process properly this time. Get legal advice. Understand her rights. Build a case for custody that would protect Maya while ensuring Damien could still be her father. It was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But safe had never been what she actually wanted. If it had been, she never would have married Damien Moretti in the first place. She put the phone away and walked back to the house, her mind still spinning but her heart starting to settle into something that felt almost like clarity. She found Damien in the garden with Maya, lying on a blanket in the shade, while their daughter grabbed at his fingers and made the happy gurgling sounds that meant she was content. "She's been perfect," Damien said, looking up as Lena approached. "We read a book. Well, I read, and she chewed on the corners, and then we just laid here watching clouds. She's very good at watching clouds. Lena sat down on the blanket beside them, and something about the scene, the three of them in the dappled sunlight, Maya between them like a bridge, made her throat tight. "I want to tell you something," she said quietly, "about the first time I was pregnant." She watched his expression shift from confused to understanding to pain as she explained about the miscarriage, about the relief she'd never voiced, about how his response had made everything worse, even though she knew he'd been trying to help. "I never knew you felt that way," he said when she finished, his voice rough. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought if I just made everything safe enough, controlled enough, you'd be okay. But I wasn't okay. I was drowning, and when I got pregnant with Maya, all I could think about was that feeling, that suffocating, overwhelming feeling of being protected to death. So you ran." "So I ran. And I told myself I was doing it for her, to give her a better life. But I was also doing it for me, to prove I could survive without you, to prove I was strong enough to choose freedom over love." Damien reached out slowly and took her hand. She let him, feeling the familiar warmth of his palm against hers. "And did you prove it?" "Yes. And no." She looked at Maya, who was still happily occupied with trying to grab her own toes. "I proved I could survive. I proved I was strong, but I also proved that surviving isn't the same as living, and that freedom without love is just a different kind of lonely." "So what are you saying?" Lena took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing on the edge of that cliff again, ready to jump. "I'm saying that I looked at those divorce papers every night for 3 days. I read every clause, every provision, every word, and I kept waiting to feel relief or certainty or peace about signing them. But all I felt was sad." She turned to face him fully. "I'm saying that you're not the only one who needs to change. I need to learn how to ask for what I need instead of running when I don't get it. I need to learn how to trust that loving you doesn't mean losing myself. I need to learn how to be a partner instead of just a victim or a rebel." "Lena, I'm not finished." She squeezed his hand, grounding herself in the contact. "I'm also saying that I need you to understand something. I'm not staying because I'm desperate, or because I don't have other options, or because Maya needs her father. I'm staying because I want to, because I still love you even though I've spent 8 months trying not to, because I think we could build something better than what we had before if we're both willing to do the work." The hope that flooded his face was almost painful to witness. "You're staying." "I'm staying, but with conditions, real ones, not just promises we make and break when things get hard. Anything, whatever you need." Lena pulled the divorce papers from her bag, crumpled from being carried around, marked with coffee stains and tear tracks. She held them up between them. "These stay. I keep them as insurance, as a reminder that I always have a choice. And if you ever make me feel like I don't have a choice, if you ever go back to controlling instead of protecting, I will sign them and I will leave and there won't be a third chance." "Understood." "Second condition. I go back to school. I finish my art degree. I build a career that's mine, separate from your world. You support that financially and emotionally, and you never make me feel guilty for prioritizing my work." "Done. I'll call the university tomorrow if you want." Third condition, therapy. Real, ongoing therapy, both individual and couples. Not just for a few weeks until things calm down, but for as long as it takes to build healthy patterns. And if the therapist says we need to make changes, we make them. No arguing that you know better or that it's not how things work in your world. I'll add Dr. Mercer to my permanent schedule. Fourth condition. You follow through on transitioning the business. I want quarterly updates on your progress. I want to see concrete steps toward legitimacy, and I want veto power over any dealings that cross ethical lines I'm not comfortable with. Damien's jaw tightened slightly at that one, but he nodded. That's fair. Though I need you to understand it's going to take years, not months, and there will be dangerous periods during the transition. Which brings me to condition 5, honest communication about danger. You don't hide threats from me to protect me. You don't make unilateral decisions about our safety. We talk about risks like partners, and we make decisions together about what level of security we're comfortable with. Even if I think you're being naive about the danger, even then, you make your case, I make mine, and we compromise. Like adults. Like equals. He was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him processing, weighing, measuring the cost of what she was asking against the benefit of having her stay. Finally, he nodded. Okay, all 5 conditions. I agree. Just like that? Just like that. Because losing you taught me that power without you is worthless. Control without love is just a prison I built for myself, and I'd rather risk everything trying to be the partner you deserve than live safely alone. Lena felt tears burning her eyes, but this time they weren't from pain or fear or exhaustion. They were from something that felt dangerously close to hope. She picked up the divorce papers and slowly, deliberately tore them in half, then in half again, and again, until they were just pieces of paper fluttering in the breeze, settling around them on the blanket like snow. I must be crazy, she said, watching the pieces scatter. Absolutely crazy to believe this can work. Probably, Damien agreed, and there was a smile in his voice she hadn't heard in years. But I'm crazy too. We'll be crazy together. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and kissed her forehead with such tenderness that she felt something crack open in her chest. All the walls she'd built, all the armor she'd worn, crumbling in the face of his gentle certainty. Maya chose that moment to let out an indignant squawk, apparently upset at being ignored. They both laughed, the tension breaking, and Lena scooped her daughter into her arms. What do you think, baby girl? She murmured against Maya's soft hair. Should we give your daddy another chance? Maya responded by reaching for Damien, her little hands opening and closing in that universal baby gesture of, pick me up. He took her carefully, and the look on his face as he held both his daughter and his wife's hand was so full of wonder and relief and desperate hope that Lena had to look away before she started crying again. We should call Dr. Mercer, Damien said after a moment. Tell her the news. Schedule our next session. And I should call Sarah, let her know the schedule is permanent. And I should probably call Vincent before he has a heart attack trying to manage the Calabrese situation alone. They looked at each other and laughed at the absurdity of it, the mundane logistics of rebuilding a life from ruins. But that was what love was, Lena was learning. Not just the grand gestures and passionate declarations, but the small daily choices to keep choosing each other. That evening, they had dinner together in the garden, a simple meal that Mrs. Chen had prepared, with Maya in a high chair between them, making a spectacular mess of pureed sweet potato. It was domestic and ordinary, and nothing like the formal dinners they used to have, where business associates would visit and Lena would smile and play the perfect wife while dying inside. I have something for you, Damien said as they were finishing. He pulled a small box from his pocket and slid it across the table. Lena opened it to find a key, simple, silver, unremarkable, except for what it represented. It's to the security office, he explained. Full access. You can change codes, review footage, add or remove permissions. I already told Michael that your authority supersedes mine when it comes to interior security. If you say cameras go off, they go off. If you say a room is off limits, it's off limits. She closed her hand around the key, feeling the weight of trust it represented. Thank you. Don't thank me for giving you what should have been yours from the beginning. He paused, then added, I also set up an account in your name only. It's got enough to cover tuition, living expenses, whatever you need to rebuild your independence. The password is Maya's birthday. No one else has access, not even me. Damien, let me finish. I know you said you didn't want my money, that you didn't want to feel bought. But this isn't about buying you. It's about making sure you always have options, so that if you stay, it's because you want to, not because you have to. Lena felt her throat tighten. You're really serious about this, about changing. I've never been more serious about anything in my life. He reached across the table and took her hand. I can't promise I'll be perfect. I can't promise there won't be moments where I slip back into old habits, where I try to control instead of trust. But I can promise I'll try. Every single day I'll try to be worthy of the choice you're making. They sat there as the sun set, painting the garden in gold and amber light, and Lena felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of hope that conflict could be worked through, that love could be messy and complicated and still worth fighting for. Later that night, after Maya was asleep and the house had gone quiet, Lena found herself standing in the doorway of the master bedroom, the room she'd shared with Damien for 5 years before fleeing. It had been redecorated since she left, she noticed. The heavy masculine furniture was gone, replaced with lighter pieces. The dark colors had been painted over in soft creams and blues. It looked different, less like a king's chamber and more like a room where two people might actually live together. "I had it redone," Damien said from behind her. "After you left, I couldn't stand looking at it the way it was, knowing you'd hated it and never told me. I didn't hate it. You didn't love it either, and I want you to love our home. So if you want to change things, change anything, just say the word." Lena walked into the room and ran her hand over the new bedspread, soft, inviting, nothing like the stiff brocade that had been there before. "It's beautiful." "I'm glad you think so." He hesitated at the threshold. "I can sleep in the guest room. I don't want you to feel pressured. Stay." The word came out before she could second guess it. I'm not ready for everything to go back to how it was. But I don't want to sleep alone tonight. I want to be close to you without it meaning anything more than that." "Okay," he said simply. They got ready for bed in careful silence, both hyper-aware of each other's presence. When they finally slipped under the covers, Damien stayed on his side and Lena stayed on hers, a careful foot of space between them. But then she felt his hand reaching across the divide, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. She took it. They fell asleep like that, hands linked across the space between them, neither quite ready to bridge the full distance, but both willing to reach for each other in the dark. The next morning, Lena woke to find Damien already up, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear. She tensed, old patterns flooding back, the business calls, the crisis management, the way work always took precedence over everything else. But then she heard him say, "I don't care what time the meeting is, Vincent. Reschedule it for next week. I have plans with my family today." A pause. "No, not negotiable. Figure it out." He ended the call and turned to find her watching him. "Sorry, I tried to take it in the hall, but Maya started fussing and I didn't want her to wake you." "You rescheduled a meeting." "I told you I would. Family first." "But you never—" She stopped, correcting herself. "You never used to do that." "I never used to have a reason important enough to do that. Now I do." He moved to the bassinet and scooped up Maya, who immediately stopped fussing and looked up at him with those serious eyes that were so much like his. "Good morning, Principessa. Did you sleep well?" Watching him with their daughter, seeing the tenderness, the absolute devotion, Lena felt something shift in her chest. This was real. The changes, the effort, the careful rebuilding of trust. It was all real. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm that was both familiar and entirely new. Mornings with Maya, painting sessions for Lena while Sarah watched the baby, therapy sessions with Dr. Mercer in the afternoons. Damien worked from home, delegating ruthlessly and only taking calls that absolutely required his attention. They had dinner together every night. They talked, really talked, about their days, their fears, their hopes for the future. And slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild intimacy. Not just physical, though there was that too. Tentative kisses, careful touches, the gradual erosion of the space they'd maintained between them. But emotional intimacy as well. The kind that came from Damien, admitting when he was struggling to let go of control, or Lena confessing when she felt the urge to run. The kind that came from choosing to stay in the hard conversations instead of walking away. A week after tearing up the divorce papers, Lena received her acceptance letter from the university. She'd applied months ago, back when she was still living in that cold studio apartment, thinking it would never happen, that she'd never have the time or money to go back. But Damien had somehow found out and paid the application fees, had sent in her transcripts, had made it possible. She found him in his study and held up the letter, tears streaming down her face. "I got in," she managed. "I got into the art program." He looked up from his desk, and the pride in his expression was so pure, so unguarded, that it took her breath away. "Of course you did. You're incredibly talented." "Classes start in January. I'll need to arrange childcare, figure out a schedule, balance everything?" "We'll figure it out together," he said, coming around the desk to pull her into his arms. "Whatever you need, whatever it takes. We'll make it work." Standing there in his embrace, letter clutched in her hand, Lena realized something profound. This was what she'd been missing all those years ago. Not just love, but partnership. Not just protection, but trust. Not just passion, but respect. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I've been trying not to, trying to protect myself from getting hurt again. But I love you. Even with all the complications and the fear and the uncertainty, I love you." She felt his arms tighten around her, felt the shudder that went through him like he'd been holding his breath for months and could finally exhale. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I never stopped. Even when I knew I'd lost you, even when I thought I'd destroyed any chance we had, I never stopped loving you." That night, they made love for the first time since she'd come back. It was different from before, slower, gentler, more about connection than possession. Afterward, lying in the dark with her head on his chest, Lena felt something she'd been afraid to even hope for. She felt safe. Not the controlled, suffocating safety of being locked in a gilded cage, but the real safety that came from choosing to be vulnerable with someone who'd proven they wouldn't break that vulnerability. The safety of being seen, fully and completely, and loved anyway. "Tell me about the business transition," she said quietly. "The real status, not the sanitized version." She felt him tense slightly, then deliberately relax. "It's harder than I expected. The Calabrese family is pushing back, trying to block some of my moves toward legitimacy because it affects their operations. There's been some tension." Tension meaning violence? Tension meaning threats, posturing. Nothing that's escalated yet, but it could. He paused. "I won't lie to you, Lena. The next few years are going to be dangerous. There are people who have a vested interest in keeping me in the illegal operations, and they're not going to let me walk away quietly." "So what's your plan?" "Careful maneuvering, strategic alliances with families who are also trying to go legitimate, strengthening the legal businesses until they're profitable enough that I don't need the illegal income, and accepting that I might lose some power in the process." "Can you live with that? Losing power?" "I can live with losing power if it means keeping you and Maya safe, if it means building something we can actually be proud of." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "The question is whether you can live with the danger during the transition." Lena thought about that, really thought about it, about the threats and the risks and the very real possibility that his past would come back to hurt them. It would be so easy to say no, to demand he walk away completely or let her take Maya somewhere safe until it was over. But that wasn't partnership. That was running again. And she was done running. "Yes," she said finally. "I can live with it. As long as you're honest with me about the risks, as long as we make security decisions together, as long as you're genuinely working toward getting out. I can live with the danger if it means we're building toward something better. Even if it takes years? Even then." "Because I'm not looking for perfect anymore, Damien. I'm looking for honest. And this, what we're building now, this feels honest." 3 months later, Lena stood in front of her first canvas in the university studio, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. Around her, other students, mostly younger, all talented, were setting up their own stations. She felt simultaneously ancient and brand new. Her phone buzzed with a text from Damien. "How's the first day? Maya and I are cheering you on. She drooled on a picture of your painting, which I'm choosing to interpret as artistic commentary." She smiled and texted back, "Terrifying and amazing. See you tonight." The professor, a formidable woman in her 60s with paint-stained hands, came by to look at Lena's portfolio. She studied the pieces in silence, her expression unreadable, and Lena felt herself holding her breath. "This one," the professor said, pointing to the storm clouds with gold breaking through. The painting Lena had made that first morning back at the estate. "This is honest. This is real. I want to see more work like this. Less technically perfect, more emotionally true." It was the best feedback Lena had ever received. That evening, she came home to find the house transformed. Damien had set up a proper studio in the east wing, floor-to-ceiling windows for natural light, professional easels, shelves stocked with every supply she could possibly need. Maya was in her high chair, covered in what looked like spinach, grinning at the chaos. "Surprise," Damien said, looking uncertain. "I know we talked about you having space to work, and I thought, if it's too much, if I overstepped..." Lena kissed him before he could finish the sentence. "It's perfect. You're perfect. This whole ridiculous, messy, complicated situation is perfect. They settled into their new normal. Lena at school 3 days a week, painting in her studio the other days. Damien managing the business transition, taking conference calls from home while Maya napped. Sarah helping with childcare but not replacing Lena as Maya's primary caregiver. Dr. Mercer keeping them honest in weekly therapy sessions, pushing them to communicate instead of assuming, to ask instead of demanding. There were hard moments, times when Damien's instinct to control flared up, and Lena had to remind him about boundaries. Times when Lena felt the urge to run and had to force herself to stay and fight instead. Times when the danger of Damien's world touched their home and they had to make difficult decisions about security and safety. But they worked through them, together, as partners. On Maya's first birthday, they threw a party in the garden. Just family. Mrs. Chen, Sarah, a few of Damien's associates who'd become genuine friends rather than just business connections. Maya smashed her cake with enthusiastic glee, getting frosting in her hair and making everyone laugh. Lena watched Damien help their daughter open presents, watched him get down on the floor to play with her new toys, watched him be fully present in a way she'd never thought possible. And she felt grateful, not just for the material comfort or the security or any of the external things, but for the choice she'd made to stay, to fight, to believe in the possibility of change. Later, after the guests had left and Maya was asleep, Damien found Lena in the garden. He took her hand and led her to the fountain where he'd proposed all those years ago. "I want to do something," he said quietly, "and I need to know if you're okay with it." He knelt down, and for a moment Lena's heart stopped, thinking he was going to propose again. But instead he pulled out her wedding ring, the one she'd left behind when she fled, the one she'd never asked for back. "When I gave you this the first time, I made a lot of promises I didn't keep. I promised to love and cherish you, and instead I controlled and suffocated you. I promised partnership, and I gave you surveillance. I promised freedom, and I built you a cage." He looked up at her, and his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I can't take back those failures. But I can ask you now, with full knowledge of who I am and who I'm trying to be, if you'll wear this ring again. Not as a symbol of ownership or obligation, but as a symbol of choice, of choosing to build this life together, every day, even when it's hard." Lena looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the life they were slowly, carefully building from the ashes of what had been. She thought about how far they'd both come, about how much further they had to go, about all the ways they could still fail or hurt each other or fall apart. And then she thought about the alternative, a life without this messy, complicated, impossible love, a life that was safe and controlled and utterly empty. "Yes," she said, holding out her hand. "Yes, I'll wear it. I choose this. I choose you. I choose us." He slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and when he stood, she pulled him into a kiss that tasted like tears and hope and new beginnings. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for giving me another chance, for believing I could change, for choosing to stay." "Thank you for actually changing," she whispered back, "for doing the work, for proving that love doesn't have to be a prison." They stood there in the garden as night fell around them, wrapped in each other's arms, and Lena thought about the storm that had brought her back to this place, about the empty formula can and the desperate phone call, and the choice that had seemed like defeat but had turned into something else entirely. Not a fairy tale, not a simple happy ending, but something real and honest and worth fighting for. The next morning, Lena woke to find Maya already awake, standing in her crib and babbling happily. She scooped her daughter up and went to find Damien, discovering him in the kitchen making breakfast, or attempting to with mixed results. "I'm making pancakes," he announced proudly, gesturing to a pan of what could generously be called pancake-adjacent blobs. "Or trying to. I think I need more practice." "I think you might," Lena agreed, laughing, "but I appreciate the effort." They ate the slightly burned pancakes together, Maya in her high chair making a spectacular mess. And as Lena watched her family, her chosen, hard-won family, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt whole. Not because someone else had made her whole, not because she'd found her missing piece or completed herself through love, but because she'd fought her way back to herself, had demanded space to be fully human, had refused to sacrifice her identity for security, and in doing so, she'd built something better than what she'd lost. A life where love and freedom could coexist, where protection didn't require control, where family meant choosing each other every single day with full knowledge of the cost and full commitment to paying it. Later that week, Lena sold her first painting, the storm clouds with gold breaking through, the one her professor had praised. A gallery owner had seen it at a student exhibition and offered more than Lena had ever imagined for her work. She came home with the check in shaking hands and found Damien in his study. "I sold a painting," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. He looked up, and the pride on his face was so genuine, so complete, that it made her chest ache. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "I want to use the money to set up a scholarship," she said, the idea forming as she spoke. "For single mothers trying to go back to school. Women who are where I was 8 months ago, desperate and struggling and trying to build something better for their kids. That's a beautiful idea. Will you help me set it up, navigate the paperwork and the logistics?" "Of course. Whatever you need." They worked on it together over the following weeks, and watching Damien use his connections and resources to help her build something good felt like the final piece falling into place. This was who they could be together. Not him controlling and her resenting, but both of them contributing their strengths to build something meaningful. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, months after she'd torn up the divorce papers, Lena found herself back in the garden with Maya. Their daughter was walking now, toddling really, with the unsteady gait of someone still figuring out how legs worked. She stumbled toward Lena, laughing, and fell into her mother's arms. Damien joined them, sitting on the grass beside Lena and pulling them both into his embrace. They sat there as the afternoon sun painted everything gold, as Maya babbled about things only she understood, as the world continued its slow spin. "Are you happy?" Damien asked quietly. Lena thought about the question, about the complexity of happiness, about how it wasn't a constant state but a choice made over and over, about how some days were hard and some were easy, and all of them required work. "Yes," she said finally. "Not perfectly happy, not without fear or doubt or moments when I wonder if we're doing this right, but happy in a real way. Happy in a way that feels earned." "Good," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because you deserve to be happy. Really, truly happy. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." "Just don't forget to be happy too," she said, turning to look at him. "Don't make your whole life about earning my forgiveness or proving you've changed. Be happy because you deserve it too." Something shifted in his expression, and she knew she'd touched on something he'd been carrying, the guilt. The feeling that he had to constantly prove himself worthy. She took his face in her hands and kissed him softly. "We're both works in progress," she murmured. "We're both learning and failing and trying again. That's okay. That's what love is. Not perfection, but persistence." They stayed in the garden until the sun set, and Maya fell asleep between them, her small body warm and trusting. And as Lena looked at her family, her beautiful, complicated, hard-won family, she knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, but the right one. The choice to believe in second chances, to believe that people could change if they wanted it badly enough, to believe that love, real love, was worth fighting for even when the fight seemed impossible. And in the end, that belief had given her everything she'd been afraid to hope for. Not a fairy tale ending, but something better, something real, something that was entirely, perfectly, messily theirs.